Let me put that in context. It's an excellent question, and I think it requires us to think of learning as lifelong. I mean, if there's a single issue which I feel passionate about, it's learning, because I'm standing here because of my education. I mean, I'm here and I'm in politics and I'm in public life because of what a university education did for me, and what it also did for my dad, who came here as a Russian refugee. The university was the way my family got its footing in this country, and why I'm here standing in front of you. And we've got to start with early learning and childcare for every Canadian child, right? Because we know that will transform educational outcomes in primary and secondary. And then we have to make sure, as I said earlier, that everybody completes high school, and that everybody who's qualified out of high school gets to college or post-secondary. And we can't be snobbish about colleges and various other forms of further education. It all matters. And now we get to your point, we need to keep learning going for those who missed out the first time and come back later. And we got to say to everybody, if you got the grades, you get to go, not just a certain generation. And we then have to work with the provinces to find financing to make this possible. Because well, we've got to put some money on the table. We've got to respect provincial jurisdiction. The federal government doesn't deliver, but we can finance. But what we haven't got in this country is a sense of learning starting at, 12 months, 18 months, and going right through to the end of your life. We haven't got it. We've got an institution called the Canadian Council of Learning, which in 6 years has done more to promote that idea than any other institution in the country. And guess what? Stephen Harper just cut his funding on Friday. I'm serious. I didn't make that up. I mean, it's true. And so what we need is a national learning strategy in which we identify the gaps. We identify the people who are not getting the promise, and you've identified one. And then I have to sit down with the province of Ontario, where you happen to be, and say, she doesn't qualify for OSAP, what are we going to do here? Because she wants to come back to school. How do we make that happen? What kind of check does the federal government have to write as part of a national learning strategy? That's the best I can do, but it's a great question. Thanks for asking.
Hi, Dr. Ignatieff. My name is Eric Williams. My question to you is, what is your vision for Canada's long-term energy infrastructure? So that is to say, like, how should we meet our needs for the future in a way that's not as divisive as policies have been in the past?
That's another great question. Boy, you're putting me to work here. We had a national energy policy in the 1980s, and the Liberal Party's been paying the price out west ever since, right? But that doesn't mean we don't need a national policy on energy, right? That is, we need to sit down and have a national conversation with the federal and provincial governments about the energy portfolio the country needs to develop. And we've said as a party, we're getting 1% of our energy needs from renewables. That needs to be 5 times as large as that, so we need to incentivize wind, turbine, solar, geothermal, right? The tax incentives, research credits, whatever we can do to get that percentage up. The other part of the portfolio is hydro. It's hugely important. The other thing that's more controversial is whether nuclear is part of that portfolio. And I've said I don't see how we can meet the challenge of climate change unless nuclear is part of the portfolio. A smaller part, lesser part as we increase renewables, but it's going to be part of it. The other reality, again, that's not easy to talk about is we're in a fossil fuel world for the next 50 years, in my judgment. We can't, we're not on Mars here. Most of you came to school today in something that was burning a fossil fuel, and I can't see any short way out of that. We then have an industry that has to be sustainable, that has to get carbon down in absolute terms. And we've got a federal government that for 4 years has done squat about that, nothing about that, right? We've got provinces stepping up with cap-and-trade systems and environmental programs. We've got a federal government, a Harper government, that is not led. We need to set the rules for the fossil fuel industry that say, you got to get your carbon emissions down in absolute terms. You got to clean up the settling ponds. You got to improve your water use. You've got to improve wild species management up there, and you've got to make sure that the development of the oil sands is not hurting Aboriginal communities around. And this is a matter of federal leadership. But what I'm not going to say to you is let's get out of the fossil fuel era, because we're in it for the next 50 years, in my judgment. So we've got to get a portfolio approach to energy. And the final point I would make is that we need to think hard about infrastructure. If you're in Atlantic Canada is debating how to get that power from the lower Churchill to the markets in the United States. The alternative energy users want to get their products, wind, solar, turbine, onto the grid. One of the things I think we need to do is have a federal investment in grid infrastructure to improve and create smart grids so we can get the portfolio of energies we need out to market. And that requires federal investment. It would be like building the next generation of the railroad to create the new energy infrastructure we need. And I'm sorry to go on about this, but this is a real personal obsession. One of the other issues we need to face is we import a ton of foreign oil. And there's no discussion in this country whatever about whether it's a good idea to be buying Hugo Chavez's Venezuelan oil. None. We don't even know we do it. We're importing huge amounts of oil in from the east, and we're pumping, Alberta crude down to Texas for refining. Is that what we want to do? Do we want to build a refinery capacity in Canada so we get more of the value profit from hydrocarbons? All of these questions have to be on the table. And there's a great big silence in the middle of Canadian politics about that. Now, the federal government can't do all that, and I'm not envisaging, intrusive federal intervention here. But we need to talk. I mean, just one of the things you should do is go back, get out your computers, and look at maps of pipelines in this country. The pipeline map runs north-south. And then one of the questions we have to ask is, should we strengthen the east-west connections in our energy markets? So Alberta is supplying more of the oil needs of Ontario, instead of shipping it all down to Texas and California. These are the kind of questions that aren't on the table and need to be on the table. And when you ask me that question, I start going. And then the problem is to get me to stop. So, thank you for the question.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Dr. Ignatieff. Thank you for being here. This has been great so far. My name is McMaster.
It's all downhill from here, right?
No, it's not. I got two easy questions, very quick questions. I'm a faculty member at the Booth School of Business, and my concern is about competitiveness in the global marketplace. As a faculty member, I want to make sure my students graduate and contribute to society and have better jobs than previous generations. So I want to know how the future Prime Minister is going to help do that.
Competitiveness, productivity. Productivity measures in Canada have been falling in 2000 onwards, particularly in my view since 2006. What do we do about it? I mean, first of all, education, training. One productivity problem we don't talk about is we're going into an economy where we may have persistently high unemployment and skill shortages. And we'll have skill shortages because people don't have the training to do the darn jobs. Remember what I said earlier about the 1 million kids who haven't got high school, the 1.6 million who have grade 3 literacy levels? You talk productivity, you've got to talk about literacy, right? Then you've got to talk about another problem, which is the dollar. We've built the manufacturing sector in Ontario on a 65-cent dollar. The dollar's now at par. One of the drivers of productivity. The bad news is we built an industry on a 65-cent dollar. The good news is the appreciation of the dollar is driving us towards getting competitive some other way. We've got to get the unit cost of labor down. And then we get to the final point on productivity, which is energy. People forget that in